Hello and welcome to BYJU'S. Every year, a number of reports are released by different international institutions and the organization like NOAA, that is National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, maybe by IPCC, or maybe the Living Planet report or the Hunger report. So many reports are released by the different organizations. These reports are very significant in case of prelims, and sometimes the summary of these reports are very significant in giving the justification when you are writing opinion based questions. So in that case, these data, when you compare that with the previous data or previous reports, you will find what changes have been done or what magnificent change has been done in that particular area. So these reports will help in both parameters, prelims as well as the mains also. So with this, we start today's session, the Living Planet report of 2018. Now, this report gives an entire idea about the biodiversity of an Earth. It may be terrestrial or it may be aquatic. So it provides all the information about the status of the biodiversity, including the flora as well as the fauna. And this report is released by Zoological Society of London. And this society is an international scientific, conservation and educational organization. And the mission of this organization is to achieve and promote worldwide conservation of animals and their habitats. So this organization releases a report which is referred as the Living Planet Index with collaboration the Worldwide Fund or WWF. So this report is very significant in defining the biodiversities, and it also makes an alarming aspect in which way we are moving towards the diversities of the Earth. This Living Planet Index, which is developed by the Zoological Society of London and the Worldwide Fund, provides an indicator of the state of global biodiversity and the health of our planet. Now, this biodiversity is very significant because it produces all the services. It provides the food, it provides the raw materials, it also acts as a security, or it provides the physical support when you talk about the events like cyclones, tsunamis. The mangroves, they act like a bioshields. It means that they provide the protection also. So numerous services are provided by the biodiversity for the humankind. Along with that, they also are responsible for providing the economical resources. So this biodiversity is very, very significant in sustaining the human tendencies on the Earth's surfaces. So in that view, getting a report or getting the status of biodiversity is very, very important. And this status gives an idea about how we can make the policies, how we can restructure the policies so that we can sustain the carrying capacity of the ecosystem or the biosphere. Now, this report was first published in the year 1998, and once in every 2 years, this report is released or published. So in the year 2018, they have released the report. Now, this report explores 3 indicators. Now, 3 indicators are associated with the hierarchy of ecology. Now, when we talk about the hierarchy of ecology, in case of ecosystem or in case of ecological principles, we find the individual organism is there. Then after that, we find the species, and these species are also called as the population. And above the population, we have community. And above the community, we have ecosystem, and bigger than ecosystems are referred as biomes, and much more bigger than biomes, we call them as the biospheres. So these are called as the hierarchies of an ecology. And this report indicates the first thing is about the measure changes in the species distribution, that is the second level. It explains about what the species, the flora and the fauna, what level they have been changed or in what matter they have been declined. So it gives an indication about the species or the population in the biosphere. And it also gives an aspect of extinction risk, and it gives an idea about change in the community composition, that is the third level community. It also provides how the community is changing. So it gives an idea about all the three, that is species distribution, extinction risk, and the community composition. And when they concluded the report, it was found that all the three parameters were declining, or they were showing a tendency of the change. It means that the species were declining, both flora as well as fauna, not in uniform way but in different ways. Some regions the decrease was more pronounced, and in some areas it was comparatively less, but the tendency of decrease was seen in case of the species. And also the community composition also was changing with reference to the anthropogenic factors which were mainly concerned in these parameters. So this report is very, very significant in identifying these parameters. And along with this, this report is also very important because post 2020, that is after 2020, when we want to make a new strategies or policies in conserving the flora and fauna, which is reflected in Convention of Biological Diversity, and also what we call it as the Sustainable Development Goal. So this report will help in framing or restructuring the conventions of biological diversities, that is how to prepare or what blueprints can be made to reverse the trend of the decreasing tendencies. So this report is very, very significant in these parameters. Now some of the important findings of the report. Now the first one is, it says that 60% decline in the population size between 1970 to 2014. Now there has been a declining in the population size, more specifically in birds, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, and fish species. So considerably 60% decline is seen from 1970 to 2014. Now again it says that freshwater species declined by 83%, which is very, very alarming in case of the biodiversity, and it has decreased since from 1970. So from 1970 to 2014 there has been a dramatic decrease of 83% of the freshwater species. It says that we have lost almost all half of the shallow water corals in the last 30 years. It means that the shallow water corals have been lost since 30 years. And apart from that, it has given a very significant aspect of the ecological footprint and the biocapacity. The report says that the ecological footprint have exceeded the biocapacity of an earth. Now when we say ecological footprint, this ecological footprint is a demand side. It is a demand by the human population or the human beings on the biological services provided by the ecosystem, and after consuming these, the wastes which are generated, these wastes are absorbed by the biodiversity. So it means that ecological footprint is a demand of the biological resources which are needed for the sustaining human tendencies, and the wastes which are generated are consumed or absorbed by the biodiversity. That is an ecological footprint. Now the supply side of this ecological footprint is referred as biocapacity. Now the earth biodiversity or the biosphere of an earth supplies the needed things. It may be the fodder, it may be food, it may be the marine species. So all these supplies are provided in the part of biocapacities. So biocapacity gives an idea about the supply. And when we talk about the demand and supply, if there is a balance between demand and supply, it maintains the sustenance of an ecosystem or the biosphere. Now, when biocapacity increases than ecological footprints, we can say that when the supply increases more than the demand, then it will be a surplus. When the demand is more than the supply, so in this case there is always a deficiency or a deficit. So this deficiency is referred as ecological deficiency, and this ecological deficiency is referred as ecological overshoot. Now, since from 1970, we find that the demand has exceeded far than the supply. It means that due to increasing population, we find the demand is continuously increasing more than what the earth can regenerate or renew the resources. So there is always a shortage of the supply capacities of the resources in the earth's biodiversity. So it has highlighted that ecological footprint has increased tremendously more than the biocapacity, which leads to ecological overshoot, deficiency or dearth of the supply. And it also highlighted the great acceleration. Now this great acceleration has been seen more since from the 20th centuries, but it has pronounced or it has accelerated more since 1970s. This acceleration refers to degradation of the resources. It may be land resource, it may be soil resource, it may be water resources, it may be any biological resources. So all these resources are depleting in an accelerated way because of increased population and the human interferences. So that's the reason why even the scientific communities are using the term called as Anthropocene period for this phase. It means that human-induced interference is responsible for making the ecological overshoot, and it is also responsible for the great acceleration which has pronounced increased since from 1970. These ecological footprints and the biocapacities are expressed in the global hectares, and they are calculated every year. It means that what is the demand and how much living capacity. In the year 2017, they found that the demand and the supply which was seen, the resources which were supplied by the earth, which we call it as biocapacity, can suffice us only up to August 1 of 2017. So it means that from August 2nd, we have to make more imports, over exploitation of the resources, which leads to degradation of the lands. Pollution has increased. All these parameters are seen because of over exploitation of the resources from August 2. So that's the reason why August 2 was considered as an Earth overshoot day for 2017. And as the depletion of the resources increased comparatively, so this year when they calculated, that is in the year 2018, when they calculated that, it was one day prior than the 2017. So this year August 1 is considered as the overshoot day. So last year it was 2nd August 2017, and in this year 2018, one day prior to that, that is August 1, is considered as an overshoot day. It means that the supply and demand can suffice only up to that. After that, we have to make over exploitation of the resources, which leads to the pollution, land degradation, increased aspect of the stress on the marine resources. So these all leads to decreasing in the capacities of the biospheres also. Now this report also talks about the biogeographical realms or biogeographical regions. So in general, there are 8 biogeographical realms or the regions are there. These biogeographical realms are the larger geographical areas which are separated by the physical barriers, by the oceans or by the mountains. So they are separated by the geographical barrier or the physical barriers, and they have been in isolation from each other. And this movement of the lands was explained by the continental drift theory and also by plate tectonic theory, which were responsible for drifting up of the lands from each other. So these geographical regions, they have developed the evolutionary stage of the particular type of species in that region, which are having the gene pool which is confined to such geographical regions or geographical realms. So such geographical areas or the larger areas which are far more bigger than the biomes are referred as the biogeographical realms, which have a unique evolutionary stages of each species and the flora and fauna which evolved over a period of a time in that particular region and which are separated by the barriers like oceans, mountains. So such regions are referred as the biogeographical realms, and we have totally 8 of them. Now in this report it has showed that in all the biogeographical realms there is a tendency of declining of the species. It may be Nearctic, or it may be Neotropic, or it may be the Palearctic. We find there is a tendency of decreasing of the species is seen. It says that in case of Nearctic, 23% of the species decrease is seen. And in case of Palearctic, it says that 31% of the decreasing tendency of the species is seen. And in case of south, when we see, that is south of equator, it is more pronounced in the declining of the species. The region which is called as Neotropics, which is highlighted, where 89% of the species decrease is seen. Now this Neotropic region is a part of Central America. It includes Latin America and the Caribbean islands. So these three make the Neotropic, and 89% of the species have declined in this region of Neotropics, which is very, very significant in case of the reports. Now the second is the Afrotropics. In case of Afrotropics, 56% of the decline is seen in the species. And in case of Indo-Pacific, it says that around 64% of the species have declined. So in the southern hemisphere, south of equator, we find there is a tremendous or pronounced decline in the species. Again, when you talk about this Indo-Pacific, they include this Indo-Malayan region. It includes Australasia and Oceania. So these three are included in the Indo-Pacific. And in the south, we find Antarctica realm. So we find Nearctic, Neotropic, Palearctic, Afrotropics, Indo-Malayan, Oceania, Australasia, and Antarctic. So 8 geographical realms are seen. Now India is very significant because it shares 2 biogeographical realms. One is Palearctic and Indo-Malayan. So that's why India is referred as one of the rich biodiverse country in the world. And of course, it is a mega biodiverse country in the world. So that's why we find 4 biodiversity hotspots associated with the India, as it is rich in the biodiversities because of these 2 biogeographical realms which is shared. And these regions are also very, very significant in defining the faunal classification also. Sometimes questions may be asked on the lines which have been used to define. For example, when you talk about the lines, we come across a line called as Wallace line. This Wallace line is a line which demarcates the Indian part or the Asian part from Australian parts. So in general, we say this Wallace line demarcates the marsupials from the non-marsupials. So marsupials are the animals which are having the pouches, like the kangaroo, and non-marsupials like the tigers and all. So this line is very, very significant, which demarcates the 2 faunal, or it is called as the faunal division between the Australian and the Asian, right? So this line again was modified by a person called as Weber. So we find different perspectives are seen. So very significant is the Wallace line. So Wallace line is considered as a faunal boundary between the Australasian or Australia and the Asian part, or it demarcates the animals or the faunas which are marsupials and non-marsupials. So there may be questions which can be asked in your prelims regarding the Wallace lines, or in case of mains, you can expect the question on biogeographical realms. But in this report, it has showed that in all the biogeographical realms, there has been a tendency of declining of the species. In the north, of course, it is less, but still it is a worrying factor. But when you talk about the south, it is more pronounced in case of the species decline. This report has identified the major threats or the reasons for declining of the biodiversities. Among those, we find habitat loss and the degradation is on priority, which is responsible for modification of the environment. So here we find the modification is done because of increasing the population and the demand of the resources. So this is responsible for the destruction of habitats of the animals in their regions, which is seen in different parameters. For example, nowadays we find man and animal conflicts have increased because of the destruction of these habitats or modification of these habitats in which the animals live for the longer generation periods. Then the second one is species overexploitation. Now, when we talk about the ecological footprints, when it has increased than the biocapacity, it means that overexploitation is a cause. Overexploitation is needed to supply the demands. So in that case, overexploitation of the species, it may be the species which are found in the marine or on the terrestrial, the overexploitation will definitely lead to decline in the number. It means that there is less chances of renewing of the species. Then pollution is one of the major cause. Along with that, invasive species and the diseases. These invasive species or the alien species which enters into an ecosystem are responsible for the competing for the food and the space. Once they compete in that, then they are responsible for converting themselves into the predators, and they are also responsible for spreading up of the diseases. So in that case, the invasive species are also significant in responsible for declining the species population of the region. Along with that, climate change is also considered as one of the major factor which shows a declining tendency in case of the population species in that particular region, where the habitat destruction is seen and variations are seen in case of the different weather phenomena. It may be heat waves, cold waves, extreme temperature conditions, increased frequency of droughts, increased frequency of the floods, more amount of cyclones, right? So these all are responsible for decreasing the species. So even climate change is also very significant in defining the reduction of the biodiversities. So by this, I conclude the session. Thank you.